Did you know that the longest trade in enslaved Africans did not happen at the hands of the Europeans, but instead in the hands of the Arabs? I'm talking about a slave trade that took place around the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, one that started way back in the 7th century in the hands of so called Muslims. You see, many of us know very well about the transatlantic slave trade, about Europeans pulling enslaved Africans from their homelands and trafficking them across the Atlantic Ocean to be taken to North America, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. I myself am a product of that trade, and it's been comprehensively researched. We know that it started in about the 15th century. We know that it involved about 12 million enslaved Africans being torn from their homes and taken to some of the worst conditions that humanity has ever seen. The transatlantic slave trade was the foundation for Western industrialism and capitalism in the way that our world works today. You know, these enslaved people were forced to work on huge plantations and produce agricultural that ended up driving and running the economy that we now see throughout the Western world. Because this work was so labor intensive, the transatlantic slave trade really wanted men. So for every 2 men, there were only one female that was taken to work on these plantations because, of course, they could work harder and longer on average. And while the European states proclaimed an allegiance to Christianity, they were more so dealing in power rather than religion, and that's what legitimized them. And then, of course, they went back to find things and invent things within their religious texts that helped them to see the enslavement of other human beings as okay. Now, let's contrast that with what I'm going to call the Indian Ocean slave trade, aka the Arab slave trade. So, this started in about the 7th century, and it involved the trafficking about 10 to 20 million enslaved Africans. But instead of taking them mostly from West Africa, most of these people were taken from the eastern coast and interior of Africa, as you can see on the map behind me. And instead of going to places like Brazil, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, etc., Louisiana, they're going to places like China, India, Sri Lanka, Yemen, Oman, etc. And instead of their slavers being European, they were Arab. And another interesting difference between the two slave trades is that for the most part, the enslaved people in the Indian Ocean trade weren't working on huge plantations. Instead, they were in the service industry, working as soldiers, as domestics, and most notoriously, as concubines and eunuchs. Yes, the Arabs were castrating and having castrated thousands of young African men. The Arab world did not officially abolish slavery until well into the 20th century. And many of them still have the nerve to call Black people, fellow Muslims, abid, which means slave.
Once upon a time, in the ancient lands of Dahomey, where Nigeria, Benin and Togo are today, a special spiritual tradition began. This tradition was called Vodou, which comes from a word meaning God or spirit in the language of the Fon people. It's also known as Vodun or Vodun. Vodou is an old religion starting more than 6,000 years ago in West Africa. It didn't start in the Caribbean like many people think. Around the world, there are over 30 million people who follow Vodou. They believe in many gods and spirits. Their ceremonies include things like offering animals to spirits and letting spirits take over their bodies. Vodou is more than just dolls and pins, curses, or stories of zombies. It believes in one main powerful spirit, like Maulisa for the Fon people, Olorun for the Yoruba, or Bondi and Grand Met in Haiti. One special part of Vodou is when spirits take over people's bodies. This might sound strange, but it's an important way for people to connect with these powerful spirits or their ancestors. During this time, it's like the spirits are riding inside the person and they can communicate and give answers. This is a time when people feel very close to their ancestral spirits. Vodou has been shown in movies in a really exciting way, but it's also been treated badly by some people. It became like souvenirs for tourists in places like New Orleans, but its true history goes way back to West Africa, where it started. This is where the terrible slave trade happened. But Vodou was carried by the people who suffered to faraway lands like Brazil, Haiti, Cuba, and Louisiana. Even after 400 years, the spirit of Vodou still lives strong in the hearts of West Africans. However, there is also a darker side to this story. Some people, known as sorcerers or botano, used bad spirits to harm others with curses. Just like any faith, Vodou also had people who wanted good luck, success, and protection. So you see, Vodou is not just something strange or far away. It's part of how people all around the world look for meaning and connection to the divine or the supernatural world. It's a story that goes from West Africa to different lands, woven with spirits and beliefs, where the sacred and the everyday meet, and where faith opens the door to the unknown.
Divine all blessed greetings and salutations, honor and respect, honor and respect, honor and respect. It is another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Voodoo Hoodoo 101. Brought to you by, powered by, sponsored, and supported by NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. In 2026, New Orleans International's third International Voodoo Day promises an inspiring and immersive experience with a diverse lineup of engaging events. Highlights include an educational symposium featuring distinguished speakers from around the world, including a delegation of scholars and spiritual leaders from Benin and Haiti, as well as art exhibitions showcasing voodoo-inspired works by talented local and international artists. The event will also feature a children's program and an Afro-ecology exhibit exploring the sacred nature of plants in voodoo, their role in spiritual practices, and their connection to our ancestors. The weekend will culminate in a ceremonial procession to 9 significant sites throughout the city, locations where the enslaved were brought ashore, held, auctioned, and where they later found community and developed culture. This journey will begin at the transatlantic slave route to New Orleans marker on the moonwalk at the river just behind Jackson Square and conclude with a traditional voodoo ceremony at Congo Square. Additionally, visitors can participate in interactive workshops, community discussions, and opportunities to connect with practitioners and cultural experts throughout the year. And we certainly continue to appreciate and invite you to show up and participate in our 9 p.m. Central Standard Time weeknight podcast here on a social media platform near you or by way of our StreamYard link. We're certainly grateful for our continued daily participants. Daniel Neal, thank you so much for continuing to show up. And thank you for your super sticker. Greetings and salutations, Kawaii Goddess. We certainly appreciate you. AYIBOBO, Lateria Daniels, peace and blessings to you and yours. Siberia Faye, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Greetings and salutations to you. This is a live podcast. Greetings and salutations, Ray Alexander. Again, we certainly appreciate your continued support. Brit Brat Dash. I will certainly unmute my co-host momentarily, Brother Joshua Nylan Tanner, First Priest, Armor Bearer, my Wild Man, Black Hawk Voodoo, Queen Mother Sister Toni Val Martinez, and our beloved Elder Reggie, known here as Green Soap, leader of Shrine of the White Cloth. The 19th century was among the most tumultuous times in American history, and was so in no part because of the issue of slavery. From questions of slavery's expansion and sectional tensions to slavery's bloody end, this one issue so dominated the American political and social landscape as to still reverberate today. Only by examining the idea of slavery, in particular as it relates to Virginia, can we begin to place the events of Nat Turner revolt into its proper context. In order to understand the revolt led by Nat Turner in 1831, it is important to examine the history of slave revolts and the context in which the Nat Turner revolt took place, as both Higginson in 1889 and Egerton in 2003 have done. Additionally, the institution of slavery in the New World as a whole and the institution's history in America must be taken into account. It is also important to examine slavery and slave revolts in America and the greater Americas, in part to see the differences. Slavery began in the New World, including what would become the United States, as soon as Europeans arrived to colonize. Slaves were brought by the British, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, and French to populate and develop their holdings. In other words, if a European power wanted to establish New World colonies, especially in the Caribbean, they acquired slaves to do the work. And up until about 1820, 4 out of every 5 people who came to the Americas were African slaves, most of them going to South America and the Caribbean. For every slave that went to one of Britain's North American holdings, approximately 12 went to Brazil. The work for slaves throughout the New World was exceedingly brutal, between 1/3 and 1/2 of the slaves brought to Brazil dying within the first 5 years. Rasmussen quotes the master of the Gillifet plantation on St. Domingo, modern day Haiti, saying that he was able to produce so much sugar by consuming men and animals. As will be discussed later, this sheer volume of slaves being brought to South America and the Caribbean may account for the more frequent and more successful nature of slave revolts in these regions, as could the wholesale movement of societies. Slavery in Virginia dates back almost as far as Virginia itself. The earliest known African slaves to be brought to the Old Dominion arrived in 1619 on a Dutch trading vessel. For the next nearly 40 years, the level of importation of slaves was fairly moderate, with most arriving in the colony individually as servants. By 1625, there were a mere 23 blacks, slave and indentured, and by 1650, the number had grown to the still modest number of 300. This increase in population was due to both the occasional importation and births. Slavery in Virginia began to change in 1662 with the establishment of a company specifically for the importation of slaves. It took a couple of years for the slave trade to really pick up, but between 1664 and 1671, the Virginia slave trade took form. By the 1680s, the number of slaves was rapidly overtaking that of servants in the ranks of Virginia's unfree peoples. It was during the 1700s that slavery truly bloomed, with 12,000 recorded in 1708, some 23,000 in 1715, and by 1756, more than 120,000. It was also in 1715 that the practice of Native American slavery ended. The number of slaves increased not just in absolute numbers, but also as a percentage of the population. By 1790, the first year in which there was a census, slaves represented nearly 40% of the state's total population. The laws of this time show the level at which slavery was integrated into the culture of Virginia. Over time, there was a steady increase in laws and duties intended to discourage the importation of slaves. These efforts culminated in the first law passed by the newly sovereign Commonwealth of Virginia in 1778, which was a ban on the importation of slaves. In fact, Virginia had so many slaves that by 1831, Virginia exported as many as 1,600 slaves a year to other states through the still legal interstate slave trade. The slave trade was not the only element of slavery that needed to be addressed through new laws. The place of children of mixed heritage also had to be considered. Holding true to English law, the status of a child was determined by the legal status of the mother. What that meant was that the child of a black slave and a free white woman, often an indentured servant, would therefore be free. This law was amended to ensure that the children of slaves would themselves remain enslaved for 25 years, at which point they would be free. Later, the law was amended so that so-called octoroons, or those of only 1/8 of their ancestry being black, were no longer considered black and were therefore free. This increasing strength of laws against those of mixed heritage ended with the one-drop rule. The one-drop rule stated that if an individual could trace back any African ancestry, therefore having even one drop of black blood, they were considered black. By the time of Nat Turner's revolt in 1831, there were 469,757 slaves out of a total population of 1,211,405 for the state. This was by far the largest number of slaves in any state, beating out South Carolina by nearly 150,000. Interestingly, while Virginia has the largest number of slaves in absolute terms, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, and South Carolina, which had the highest percentage, all had higher percentages of their populations in bondage. As with the rest of the country, slavery in Virginia died in Virginia with Lee's surrender in approximately 1865. So we continue to understand and document the effect that slave revolts, slave uprisings, and indeed poisonings. In a future podcast, we're going to really get into not just root work and conjure and hoodoo in terms of healing and protection and defense, but also in defensive, in offensive demonstrations such as poisonings. Slave revolts led to an increased sense of fear about our presence here in the South, from New York to the deepest regions of the South, but particularly whereas the Nat Turner Revolt had left a footprint. Certainly, the German Coast uprising here in the New Orleans area, and many other uprisings that took place. Haiti only being the most successful of them all. But the fear of uprising, the fear of pushback, the fear of revolt fuels the increase of our demonization, and particularly as related to our spiritual traditions and practices, our ability to gather and communicate in public spaces and to maintain these relationships that we have begun to develop and foster with the indigenous peoples of the land, which were continuing to assist us in our freedom and our escape. And I want to bring in my beloved co-host. Greetings to you, Joshua Nylan Tanner, Queen Mother, Sister Toni Val Martinez, and Elder Reggie Green Soap, leader of Shrine of the White Cloth. Please do come on in. Greetings, Mambo Sally Ann.
Good day, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Hope you guys having a good afternoon, listening audience, and Divine, and Elder Reggie, and Toni Val. I was listening to what you were speaking of, and it's very that Nat Turner and the population of the people who was considered, I guess at that time, was a Negro or Black or whatever we want to call ourselves, the different things that labels we've been taking on, have been during that time there was an influx of that, and a lot of that had to do with the first people that was enslaved in this country, in the mainland of America, was Native people here. indigenous people. And a lot of those, and then slavery extended out to the outside of the mainland. I think rightfully so, for the fact of most of the Indians that probably here could just easily just run away and get back into wherever they, back to their own land and live off the land the way they have been doing. And I know that, you know, the continuing insurrections of revolt was led by both peoples, from those that came, the warriors that came from Africa, and the warriors that was here on the mainland. So, what'd you say, Elder Reggie?
Yeah, Brother Joshua, I'm glad you opened that lined up, and as listening to Divine Prince, excellent reading as you do. And good evening, Sister Toni, in the collective chat. Brother Joshua, I'm not trying to be controversial tonight, but I want to press you just a little bit, if you don't mind. Okay, so we know the slaves came in. You had Native Americans here being enslaved. Why would the Native Americans also enslave the Africans? And I'm speaking of the 5 civilized tribes that didn't release their slaves after the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, some of them held slaves over into 1870. Can you speak to that, please?
I would say that the civilized tribes are people that, or the peoples, or the peoples that decided to go into contract with the United States of America and to co-sign on certain things, and that was one of the things that they co-signed onto. I don't think it's right. I don't think, you know, I don't agree with it, but I know it happened. But I also know that there was tribes outside of that, like the Blackfeet, a lot of the Choctaw. I mean, the Choctaw is a part of it too. Actually, there's 5 civilized tribes, and the Houma Indians are not a part of it. But the Houma Indians was a peaceful tribe and always have been a peaceful tribe. So the dichotomy of like that world of tribes of indigenous people here in America were, they had some that took the side of the British, some took the side of the French, some took the side of Spanish. It was throughout the years. It was not a monolith of movement of peoples, just like how it is now within our communities. We are not a monolith to just label, oh, we're going to do this and then we move this way, unless we're pushed to the point of being oppressed by, like we have in the past in the United States, by the way we look, by the color of our skin, not because of who we are, and not because what we have to bring to the table, and the value and the worth of what, you know, of what we have. So it's during that time, I would say I haven't done a lot of research on the treaties during that time, but I know that some tribes did co-sign and wanted to and participated in the slave trade in terms of taking in peoples and Africans and facilitating whatever plantations or crops or sharecropping that they did. I'm not 100% sure, but I've heard some people mention that the actual treatment of them, those slaves on those lands, was a little bit different. But now with the whole Creek Indians and the freedmen judicial situation that just happened, which is allowing freedmen that were a part of the Creek to be a part of the tribe now, as like some type of restitution. I know during that time they enslaved some people and those freedmen, and you think about a time where people were not allowed to do a lot of things, how people weren't allowed to do a lot of things, and probably decide to go and decide to be, either I'm gonna be over here with slave to the British, or I'm gonna be over here slave to the French, or I'm gonna go over here with the Indians, and I know they're gonna treat me a little bit better. So it was just like, it's almost like a job situation in a way. Not saying that slavery was a how can I say this? Is like an employment, like where you get treated at your job. If you get paid, how much you get paid, what you're allowed to do, what you can't do. There's always some type of rule, but the rule down in those days was a lot more stern and strict. But
Yes, Joshua.
I would.
I appreciate that. I just, mhm.
That's how I mean,
think
that's
Yeah.
what I get from that. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, thank you, brother. I just was just curious how you viewed it.
I
Yes.
think that out of the 5 civilized tribes, out of all the hundreds of tribes we had here, and we know that those tribes were largely made up of blacks that were already here before the slave trade came. I think that some of them, when they said the 5 civilized tribes, I think they just gave in, tired of fighting, gave in, signed up with the United States, but they had a problem because the United States deemed the darker skins as slaves. Now, a lot of these people were family members of these people that they call the Indians of the 5 civilized tribes.
Yeah.
And they had to say, oh, this my slave, in order to keep that family member there. Pretty much kind of what a lot of free blacks did. We always talk about free blacks owning slaves and buying slaves. A lot of that was they were buying their own family. And a lot of times they couldn't free them immediately. So they went down as their slave, but it was their own family. And I think with the United States record, they just got in so deep as being slave, until they really couldn't get out of it. That's why a lot of them fighting for their place in those 5 civilized tribes. There was a lot of tribes like the Seminoles. They didn't give in. That was the longest fought Indian war that the United States never won, because the United States folded and said, oh damn, we quit. We quit. We tired of fighting these. It's been over 14, 15 years and we ain't won, and we can't get to them, and they not stopping. So I think a lot of it is based in complexion, and like that one drop thing. That one drop is a cutting edge sword, especially here in Louisiana. So many people who thought they was white, especially in the parish, St. Bernard Parish, come to find out they wasn't. They was black. And because of the law of the land, they couldn't buy and sell and own land and all kind of things. One lady fought it so hard that she wasn't black. She exposed all her family members who had been living white all those years, all their lives.
Yeah, I understand, Sister Toni. If you will, since you brought the topic up, and I just want to press you just a little bit on it. When you say there was blacks in America before the slave trade, are we talking pigmented? Let's just go with First Nation people. Or are we talking Africans? When you say there was black people on this land before the slave trade arrived?
Well, actually both, because we already know countless people came to this part of the world before Columbus. But they came, they looked, they saw, and they left. Some decided to stay. So those early explorers, I'm going to call them, that decided to stay here from Africa may have been the beginning of the native indigenous dark black Blackfoot, Crow, all them tribes that let you know blackness was in them, they may have been the early ancestors of some of these tribes that started off. You got to remember, we talking thousands of years. I mean, they got evidence that the Vikings came here. They got evidence that people from Africa and Egypt came here. Because they didn't found it, they didn't dug it up, they didn't found it. You know, I don't think
Sister
we'll
Toni,
never
with
get.
all due respect, Sister Toni, that is still being hashed out. That is not actual what you call factual. The research is not conclusive on that. I'm not trying to be argumentative because I hear a lot of these same arguments on the internet and other places. But when you really do the research, you know, independent research on your own, and you start looking at it, it just don't really verify that out. I'm not saying that it didn't happen, but it's not conclusive yet. And so if Africans did come to this land, I'm just not sure where they were and how did they encampment. Where did they encampment at? Where is the relics? Where is the artifacts? Where is the proof?
Well, they got them here in Louisiana. They got them. Look how many thousands of years the pyramids, the circles, and all of that is. We're talking about thousands of years. I mean, if we believe all life started in the African continent, the people on this side of the world had to have come from the African continent at some point before the land bridge collapsed. We know Europeans wasn't doing all that much traveling because they still thought that Earth was flat. This was still being argued up until Christopher Columbus. And people had came before him. The man America, who this country is really named after. He came, he saw, he left. I mean, if all life started on the other side of this of the world, they got here somewhere. They didn't come on a plane. They walked. I mean, when you go in Mexico, you got the Melmacs. You can clearly see that those people of African descent by the features on their statues.
Yeah.
You can clearly see those are African people. They got caves, drawings that's supposed to be done by the Hopi people. And the people, the Indians that did arts in caves.
Yeah.
You know, I was looking at this dance that they do.
I'm familiar with that.
Huh?
I just think that the original people.
They call them Kodaks. They call them Kodaks. That's all I was adding.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking at a traditional dance that was being done in Africa when they have the bells on their ankles, around their feet, and it was the same identical dance that some Native American Indians do from out west. I mean, you got to look at the thousands of years of movement and evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking thousands of years of people wandering around and moving around, especially back then where they moved around according to the seasons. So you got to look at them covering land over a large period of time. You know, the Book of Mormon, which is the Mormon religious Bible, you would call it, the Book of Mormon. In the very first chapter, when he's supposed to be speaking to the Native American, and this Native American told him, I come to you in the language of my father, which is Hebrew, and the language of my mother, which is Egyptian. That would lead you back to the child that was Hagar, was supposed to be the slave, who we know she wasn't. She was an Egyptian princess that went with the Jewish man, and he kicked them out. Who that was? Abraham with the two sons. Who had the two sons? Yeah, the two sons. Abraham supposedly kicked her out. They combined the religion that he grew up with as a Hebrew with his mother's religion. That's how we end up with Islam. So those people had to come over here from Africa in order for that native person to even be saying anything about Egypt. We didn't found actual Egyptian type pyramids in the United States.
Yeah, yeah, all over the United States. There's mounds, pyramids. There's earthworks that are very much similar. The art too. A lot of that is similar, but I think that when we look at people of color, we've taken on labels. Our society in society we've taken on labels that have blanketed our identities and covered up our identities, and that's systematically done by the government that we are oppressed by. So, in terms of the navigation of understanding and the identity of who we are as a people, we have to have a wide lens and understanding that these people didn't give us, if they didn't hand our ancestors the keys to who they were, they're sure enough not going to hand it to us. And we have to use our thinking and critical thinking skills to be able to navigate through the information that we've been given and the information that was given to our ancestors, that was given to us and passed on through stories. So I would say that we have to approach, if we were the great warriors that we were in the past, we had to navigate places. We had to be at places, master places, create beautiful artworks, and then move on from those places and went somewhere else. There's so many different places that archaeologists and people speak of and be like, okay, we don't know where these people went. They just vanished. Really? They vanished. All these people moved on to somewhere else. They mastered this place and they decided to go somewhere else and do greatness wherever they went. And that's what we do as a people, I think. So I'm gonna just leave it at that today.
I want to know, how come so many native indigenous tribes in North America know the story from their ancient, passed down for thousands of years, before they ran into a priest, before they ran into a white man, why they still have the story of the flood that occurred in Noah's day, unless their ancestors in the land of Noah told this and passed this on to them, and they kept up the tradition of passing that on, even though they were now located on this side of the world.
You know where you can only find gopher wood that Noah used to build his ark? In the state of Florida. In the state of Florida. There's nowhere else in the world where you can find gopher wood. Nowhere. So,
Brother Joshua, and I might, Brother Joshua, Noah Ark is a myth. This is not Okay, I don't want to go controversial because I love you guys, but no, art is a mythological concept. That thing is not real. And so to say the wood, the billet was found in Florida, how can you have a tangible wood item to a mythological thing?
No, I know. I'm
That
just
just
saying.
boggles my mind.
What I'm saying is that
Yeah,
that
I
the stories
understand.
that we've been told, we can take them literally or we cannot take them literally. But what we have to do is use critical thinking in order to understand what's being told to us. So I'm not saying that it was true, and that
So I have a question, Elder Reggie, in the Spiritualist church, they don't use the Bible or they just use the New Testament. I mean, I'm kind of confused.
No, Sister Toni, they did use the Bible. That was the only methodology that they had to use, especially in the 1920s. Coming up out of slavery, being disseminated from your historical roots and past. So yes, they used it. What happened with me as I moved, I'm still in the spiritual church, but as I traveled throughout the world and start touching and seeing tangible things, one with the United States military, when I was a part of that for 20 years, and also doing the deep reading and then traveling on my own, where I start using experience, real life things as my litmus test on what is real and what cannot be real. And that's all I'm saying. But the spiritual church definitely used the Bible.
Oh, okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Because
And you all already know I'm a hardcore Pan-Africanist, so position should be clear.
But we've come to the end of our show. It's time for us to close out. A very interesting conversation. Very interesting conversation. That I'm sure we'll pick up on tomorrow. Can you close us out, Elder Reggie?
Yeah.
Hello. Elder Reggie, you there?
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Sister Toni, Brother Divine Prince, Brother. As we talk and we build with each other, it's coming from a position of love. We all trying to build and learn together, because when we do the accomplishments that we do gain. With that, I say, lest we forget, the spiritual medicine of voodoo brings healing and relief from the shackles of slavery that binds the master and the slave to the same chain of social division. With that being said, there was a real master and there was a real slave. And slavery was horrible, deplorable. And the people who suffered that, even if it was done to them by their own, by Native Americans, by Europeans, by Jews, or whoever, is wrong. Because the hurt and the psychological damage from those atrocities still lingers today. And some of us who say we are African still today are suffering from PTSD from those events. And we are trying to heal. But with that, I say good night. I say good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Always a blessing, Odabo.
Sure.
Allow me to show you something.
They say I'm crazy and that might be true. I got this white in my DNA, yeah, I'm coming for you. It's time we turn the table, strip these motherfuckers on you. I wanna see you hanging from trees, it's time you pay for your dirt and your showtime. You created the monster, you created the beast. Now all this savagery you just gon' reap. I'm coming home, daddy, to the plantation, and I'm taking the lives of everybody, including the children, on some Nat Turner. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. I met my girl Harriet at the gate. If you wanna know how she doing, yeah, she's straight. But she had one question: when we gon' get up? All that talking tough, yeah, we don't walk it tough. She got it locked and loaded, got that piece up on her side. She looked me in my eyes and said, "Mitch, you ready to ride?" Moving forward, you gotta use both eyes. Watch your front and watch your back. Keep your hands up on your gas. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. He sit at the table, but he don't order no bacon. He greet me in those words, assalamu alaikum. Got them glasses on his face and them waves in his head. He go by the name of Detroit Red. He looks me in my eye and says, you only get one try. Know that your biggest opposition will come from the inside. I know you wanna love them all, but don't even try, because they'll smile up in your face while plotting your demise. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down.